In 1986, a shocking discovery is made on a roadside in San Diego, California.
What had happened is a man and his wife were walking around that side of the road. They looked over the ledge and they saw a body.
She was wrapped partially in a quilt, been out there a couple of days, so there was a lot of decomposition. They called out the police immediately.
Investigators get to work. Who is this woman and who killed her?
With homicide investigations, it's always difficult when you don't know who the victim of homicide is.
The case ultimately goes cold because there's no more leads. There's nothing more to do.
They were very much at a standstill.
But decades later, new investigative DNA technology emerges. Can it solve this Jane Doe case? Not only is investigative genetic genealogy used to catch criminals, it can identify nameless victims and connect them with families searching for them for decades. But can it be used in this case? Welcome to Bloodline Detectives. San Diego, a scenic city located on the Pacific coast of Southern California, less than 20 miles from the US-Mexico border.
San Diego County is huge. So it goes all the way to the desert, to the ocean, down to the border. It's really different depending on where you go. I live in the country. Lots of people live by the beach. Other people live in suburbia. I love it down here. I'm from Los Angeles, but it's just really, for me, it just feels like people are friendly, everybody's laid back, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful in San Diego. We have a lot of people that come to San Diego for work from Mexico and different countries from the South. So we have a lot of Hispanic people and culture.
The allure from people from Mexico and South is usually work. They're escaping poverty, they're escaping violence, they're escaping something. They hope to come north in the hopes of making better lives for themselves and their family. Now, others come here for the beaches and the zoo and theme parks.
People come down here all the time. It's beautiful down here, and there's so much to do.
San Diego tourism industry is robust and significant. We have international flights that come in from different parts of the world. And so we rely heavily on tourism for our county income.
But this beautiful city is not free of crime. San Diego police are kept busy keeping the area safe.
Our responsibility as a sheriff's office, we are the law enforcement agency for 9 contract cities, but we also handle all the unincorporated parts of the county, including that vast section of the desert and mountains.
I'm a sergeant with our homicide unit, so I supervise a call-out team of 3 detectives and then myself. And then for about 3 years, I was also the cold case sergeant. I think it's one of the most interesting things I've done on the department. You're dealing with sometimes very infamous cases from San Diego's past.
The 1980s were probably the busiest time for homicides in this county. We often talk in the department about the 1980s of being this crazy decade of murder. There were several notorious serial murders that were running around at the time. Technology was different in the 1980s. It was much more difficult to track people's activities than it is now. Books have been written about as the age of the serial killer disappeared because we can interrupt patterns much more quickly than we could in the 1980s when we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have the ability to monitor communications like we do now, we didn't have the cameras that we have available to us. So I think it was a matter of having to use the evidence that was presented to you and, kind of the old-fashioned detective work that just relied on the evidence and the interviews. And we think that one of the problems for investigators at the time is that The number of murders that were happening made it more difficult for investigators to pay significant attention to each and every one, because usually there was a new case coming up pretty quickly.
One such case is opened on August the 3rd, 1986, when a shocking discovery is made in San Diego County.
It was on a road here in San Diego.
State Route 67 is a typical road that connects several of the unincorporated areas of the county in eastern San Diego County. It starts in Lakeside, and then it travels up through Ramona and then on east into Julian. It is a primary road now. It's very busy with traffic, especially as the county has built up over the years.
That area is mountainous, and then there's like very few houses on both sides of the street. It's just kind of a desolate rural road.
A married couple, had gone there because there's a little cutout in the highway, and they were looking for rocks for their garden. And they were looking over the embankment, they saw a female body.
Finding a female like that is unusual. It's something that doesn't happen all the time. So it would have been unusual then and now.
This is pre-cell phone days. They had to go somewhere to call the sheriff's department.
The husband and the wife went home. The husband called the police. The police that responded was a deputy, Donnie Sossaman, and Mike Miller.
It had been out there probably a couple of days, so there was a lot of decomposition. They really froze the scene and called out the homicide detectives immediately.
The Homicide Division rushed to the scene to commence their investigation.
The detectives rolled out and started processing the scene. They're looking for any evidence related to that. They're obviously very careful not to disturb what evidence there may be.
We have a big area that's desert, and if you have somebody out there just laying out in the sun, it's going to have an effect on the skin and how fast people decompose and things of that nature.
They thought she was white because there wasn't enough decomposition, they couldn't tell.
She was found at the bottom of a fairly short embankment. She was a couple dozen feet from the roadway.
She was found just like on the other side of the ledge. This was, at the time, this was all dirt. It wasn't cement pavement, and there was tire tracks in the dirt.
She was wearing a dress with sandals, and she was wrapped in some sheeting. The way she was dressed didn't appear she was homeless, or she didn't have a uniform on, like she just come from work. There's a ton of things that you look for. If she's wrapped in a bedding, then she must have been either near somebody's house or in somebody's house. Sometimes there's animal activity. Sometimes animals will come in and they'll remove some of the bones and stuff like that. It's better that she was in an area where there wasn't a lot of foot traffic, because you don't want anybody to disturb the body and lose evidence. They did what we usually do, where they have someone come out and take pictures. They have a person from the lab come out to collect evidence.
She was wrapped in a blanket. There was other evidence around that may or may not have been related to her death. That part of the investigation can take hours.
The forensic evidence tech will photograph the item, they'll mark the item, and then they'll put the item in some kind of wrapping where everything that is in the item, like hairs or dirt or whatever, bugs, is all saved, and it's put into a bag or sealed pouch. We had her clothes, her shoes. She had a little bit of jewelry. She has no ID, nothing to identify her. She didn't have a purse, a wallet, any identification. Detectives were not able to identify her at all.
There weren't any fingerprints of note here, so there really wasn't a lot done in terms of the evidence. And then once the investigators and the members of the crime lab team are convinced that they've finished with the scene, then the body's taken away.
Investigators have a hard task ahead of them. they have no substantial evidence to the identity of the Jane Doe, and serial killers are operating in the area. They hope the autopsy will reveal some vital clues. August 1986, police in San Diego County, California have launched a homicide investigation after a body is discovered along Route 67 by a couple collecting stones along the roadside. Detectives so far have been unable to identify the victim due to decomposition and a lack of evidence.
Even her ethnic identity was not really clear. She was a lighter-skinned female. Unfortunately, because it had been a few days since she had been killed, the body changes. So it's often difficult to make an identity, even a guess, over race or ethnicity, sometimes even sex, depending on the level of decomposition. But there was some thought that she was a Hispanic female. But we didn't know she could be anyone. She could have been somebody who had been in the States for a day, or she could come from a family that has been in the States for many, many generations.
The body is taken in for a post-mortem examination.
So if you're trying to identify a body and they're not from the United States, dental records might not be available if they didn't go to a dentist in the United States. If you're using fingerprints, they might not be in whatever system you're using to compare the fingerprints to. And you might not have family members in the United States that are going to the authorities and reporting their relative as a missing person because they might not realize that the person is in another country.
The coroner is able to determine the cause of death.
We learned from the autopsy that she had indeed been the victim of homicide.
It didn't appear that she had been in a physical fight.
There was no evidence that she had been sexually assaulted, and that, of course, was a routine, and still is a routine part of our homicide investigations to see if something like that happens. So no, she had not been sexually assaulted, and so that wasn't a part of the investigation. She was killed by a gunshot blast to her chest. No gun was recovered at the scene. No shells were recovered at the scene. In fact, it was determined based on the evidence there that most likely she had been killed elsewhere. If she had been killed there, you would expect to see blood transfer in a way that's consistent with gunshot wounds if they were done at the scene. The fact that there was a blanket that was wrapped around indicated that most likely she was killed elsewhere.
She was killed, like we said, we think somewhere else, and our suspect was probably driven around and looked for a place to dump. Now, whether our suspect knew this area or not, it's pretty rural now. It's more of a highway going from one community to another. So I don't think I'd want to be, in today's world, pull off the side of the road and try to dump a body there now. But back then it was very rural. There was probably not very many people on that road any time of day or night. Very, very few. So it could have been a person, okay, I've done this, I need to get rid of this body, I'm gonna drive around until I find this place where I know I can get rid of this body and no one's gonna see it.
Investigators cast a wider net to try and uncover the woman's identity.
And they immediately started looking for any other females in the area that had been reported missing.
They would have to go out and interview people. They'd have to talk to all the neighbors.
The interviews initially, like back when the case was first opened, anybody who was somehow had heard something. So there were witnesses. There was obviously the person who reported seeing her body. There got some media attention. There were people who called in and said, I heard some argument. Oh, I think I saw a car parked there. Any number of things, and you go out and interview that. There are a lot of canyons in the area in which she was found, so sound travels. So they interviewed people who lived in any of the homes that were nearby.
There was like a mobile home, and there was a house there. They were all talked to, and they were not involved. They had nothing to do with it.
No one really reported anything other than seeing a few cars that ultimately not involved. There was absolutely no evidence as far as witnesses or anything like that. They didn't have anything. They had no idea. They didn't have a lot of technology back then. They can put out BOLs to different cities that are close to see if they have missing persons or missing identified people, if somebody had made a report, things of that nature, not much.
If she had a connection with the homes that were here, then perhaps that case would have been solved decades ago. But because we're quite sure that she didn't have a connection to this area, this immediate area, then we're not sure where she was before then, where she was living.
They did everything they could at the time. They spoke to everybody they could, and they were not able to identify her. And then the case ultimately goes cold because there's no more leads. There's nothing more to do. And at that point, you're just hoping that somebody calls in and says, oh, that's my relative, or I'm missing a relative or something like that. But it didn't happen.
When the case is cold, initially what happens is the lead detectives will hold that case. Once they retire, and maybe they'll turn over to someone else who's replacing them. But after a while, you can only hand the case off to so many people. And then at some point, we do as a unit, we determine, hey, this is going to our cold case file.
She was killed in 1986. And although her case never closed, our homicide cases may get a little chilly, may get super ice cold, but we're always reviewing and re-reviewing cases. So her case had been reviewed at least twice to a significant level since 1986. And usually they get reviewed because you want to look at the evidence. Oh, we didn't test the evidence in 1986 because we didn't have a means to do it. But now in 2004, we can. So evidence was tested.
We've had DNA for the last several years. In the early 2000s, they got a DNA sample from our victim and they submitted that into CODIS.
CODIS is the Combined DNA Index System. It's a database that contains DNA profiles from convicted offenders, arrestees, as well as from crime scene samples from other cases.
When her body was found in 1986, CODIS didn't exist. DNA as a routine part of homicide investigations also didn't exist. But fortunately, the crime lab here preserved her DNA. Once the CODIS system was operational, her DNA was placed in there. But unfortunately, over all these years, there had never been any hits, which we wouldn't necessarily expect because she was a victim and not a suspect.
Individuals who haven't been convicted of a crime or arrested of a crime aren't going to be in that database. And so if you're searching unidentified human remains, the hope is that a family member of that individual will submit a sample for the CODIS database. But if they don't, and if, maybe a family member isn't someone who would be in our convicted offender or arrestee database, then they're not going to hit to a profile in CODIS.
They can get hits from familial DNA, from family members who put their DNA in to see if their missing family members ever located. They got a lot of hits from around Southern California and the Southwest United States, even some far back east, but none of them quite matched up to the victim. They were very much at a standstill.
Despite the lack of success with the CODIS database, investigators do not give up. They decide to revisit the area where the 1986 Jane Doe was found.
People were recontacted, witnesses, for instance.
It was people that were living in the area to see if they could remember anything or if they had heard anything.
But again, this remained a cold case. Her identity remained unknown.
Yet again, the case runs cold for a number of years, but then in 2019, a new generation of detectives decide to have one last go at identifying the Jane Doe with pioneering technology. Will they succeed? In 2019, the San Diego Sheriff's Cold Case Unit is trying to identify a Jane Doe whose body was discovered dumped off Route 67 near Lakeside back in 1986. Now, more than 3 decades later, investigators are still trying to solve this case, along with several other major unsolved crimes.
One of those cases was from 1986. Now, she wasn't one of the first cases that we worked. We thought that there were going to be some challenges, and there were, given what initial investigators thought was her identity, that she was thought to be Hispanic. We were extremely interested in that. Whatever kind of homicide investigation we're undertaking, if it involves the Hispanic community, there may be challenges in getting them to cooperate. The biggest challenge is the fear amongst some in the community that once we've done our work with a witness or a suspect or a victim or any of those people, then somehow our next call is going to be to INS or ICE or the Border Patrol to talk about their immigration status. That isn't our role here. Our role is to solve crimes. And we work a lot on trying to break down that barrier that may exist with some people. Our victims might be Hispanic, our suspects may be Hispanic. We spend a lot of time to try to get people to trust us. And we have to honor that trust, because if we break that trust down, then that will usually be the end of that cooperation. In reviewing the case, there wasn't anything that we saw over the entirety of the investigation and the reinvestigations that we thought, oh, we missed somebody, or there was some significant piece of evidence that had gone either untested or not looked at very carefully. So when we started, we were really starting from the beginning again.
With a case like this, there wasn't really much to do with it there wasn't anything to follow up on. We saw the same basic information, a dead woman on the side of the road. There was no other evidence to follow up on.
We started working investigative genetic genealogy cases in early 2019. We became aware of investigative genetic genealogy through the Golden State Killer case. Myself and a few detectives attended a presentation given by the FBI and some of the people who worked on that case, and that was significant. This is an individual who terrorized Northern and Southern California for decades, but had gone unidentified for all that time until investigative genetic genealogy. And when we learned the processes that they use to uncover his identity, we thought, well, we have a lot of cold cases. We have a lot of unknown victims. Why don't we try to use that here? So that's where it started. We formally reopened her case as an IGG case in 2022, 36 years after her death.
So what exactly is this technique, and how does it work?
IGG is investigative genetic genealogy, and it's DNA analysis. But it's a different type of analysis than what is done at the crime lab. And so if you have DNA from an item of evidence and it hasn't, maybe matched to anyone you've compared it to, maybe you tried to put it in CODIS and it didn't have any hits, you can try to use IGG to see if you can get hits that way. So when you have a DNA profile and you don't know who it's coming from, you can take it and put it into a genealogical database like GEDmatch and see if that profile hits to any individuals already in the database. And what that's telling you is potential familial relationship. It's hitting to relatives of that unknown profile. The more people that participate in these direct-to-consumer genealogy companies and allow their DNA profile to be searched against law enforcement searches, that is giving a better chance of these unknown profiles to be able to be identified. And by building family trees and identifying, these people that are hitting to the profile, you can hopefully determine who that unknown person is.
IGG would be like if Say I don't know who my father is and I want to know who my dad is. What I can do is I can order a kit from a company and they'll send it to me. I'll take the kit and I'll follow directions, and you're collecting your saliva. And then you can send that back to the company, and the company will show you where your ancestry, like where your people come from and who you're related to.
DNA is definitely a game changer. The technology keeps expanding and growing, and it's being used in new ways that are helping solve cases that haven't been solved for decades.
We decided to do the entire process of investigative genetic genealogy in-house. Most police departments hire professional genealogists to do the genealogy portion of that. But there were a number of reasons why we decided to do it in-house. None of us were experienced genealogists. None of us did it at home and had any experience, but we were experienced analysts, we were experienced investigators, and in talking to professional genealogists, we thought we could stand up our skills that were necessary to solve these cases fairly quickly.
The advantage of doing it in-house is we don't have to hire that out. We have a really good lab here that does a lot of the work. There's some things we have to use outside labs for, to extract DNA from, bone or pieces of clothing maybe, or something like that. And our department's been very supportive in financing that.
It really all depends on the quality of the DNA. So when we worked these IgG cases, if you have DNA that's been preserved well from remains that were uncontaminated by decomposition, then it could be fairly easy for a lab to develop that profile. We have had other cases where we have completely degraded DNA, and that may take much longer. It could take months.
We can use your hair, we can use blood, and it depends on how well the item was collected and preserved.
For this particular case, I looked at items of evidence associated with the crime scene. There was a blood stain, and if I have an item of evidence with blood stain on it, I can take a portion of that stain and perform my DNA analysis on it. So I'm doing 4 steps: purification, quantitation, amplification, and detection, and developing a DNA profile from that stain. So I was able to get a DNA profile that we believe to be from the victim.
Now that Jane Doe's DNA profile is developed, investigators try to find her relatives.
So we have our raw DNA, and we uploaded it to GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA. And usually it's no more than a day before we get the results. And essentially what we get is through their websites, all the people who genealogically and genetically have some relationship to our unknown profile. So that's what is amazing about this technique, is that, I remember the very first case that I worked on, it literally was like Christmas morning. You go in and like, oh my word, this person is related to all these other people out there. They don't know, because the way that you establish relationship through these databases is through a value called centimorgans. And essentially, centimorgans demonstrate genetic distance that 2 people have to each other. A relationship of 0 centimorgans means there's no relationship, no genetic relationship between those people, all the way up to about 3,500 centimorgans, which indicates the closest genetic relationship, which would be a parent-child. So with this particular case, we saw all these people who were related. The highest relationship that we had initially was about 150 centimorgans, which at first glance would indicate that that known person and our unknown victim had a relationship of maybe third cousins, maybe second cousins once removed. We weren't going to be able to determine that until we started doing the genealogical digging. So this individual, obviously for their own unique reasons, had their DNA profile in these databases. It matched, indicating to us, oh, this person is related to this person. So yes, you start looking into and building essentially the family tree of this known person. Now, we did that initially, like we were able to figure out who this individual was, this real person who was related to our victim, and build a significant tree around that person. Figured out who his parents were, who his grandparents were, and built a family tree. We then contacted him. We knew at the genetic distance that he was not close enough that he would probably know who our victim was. So we weren't expecting him to be able to say, oh my word, I have a third cousin who went missing in the 1980s and we never knew. You always hope that you have those kinds of calls. Once in a while you get that, and we've had that, but in this case we didn't. But he was an amazing resource for us, and he really was a great help. He became invested in this case as much as we did. And the amazing thing that we found with this case, and maybe it's because we were investigating a victim's identity and not a suspect's identity, is that all the people who we call and others would call genetic witnesses became invested in learning who she was. They said, she's a member of my tribe, my family, and even though I never knew her, I want to do whatever I can to help you figure out who she is.
He tells his family history, and then we were able to contact those people or those people's children, and then we were testing them. It took 2 years, and I think we had over 1,400 people in our trees. A lady who was related to them, but by marriage, she said, call this lady because I think she can help you. And so we called her, and she said, I'm going to church. And I was like, could you just, when you go to church, could you pray that we find out who she is? And then she was like, okay, I will. And then so a couple hours later, she called, and she said, I think I know who she is. And we were like, oh my goodness.
Now, Detective Browning and her team at San Diego Sheriff's Department are closer than ever to identifying the 1986 Jane Doe. They just need a DNA sample from a close family member of the victim to finally solve this puzzle. In 1986, the remains of an unidentified woman were located next to a highway in San Diego County. 36 years later, investigators from San Diego Sheriff's Department decided to utilize investigative genetic genealogy to try to identify the victim using her family tree. Now, 2 years later, in 2024, they found a distant relative who believes she knows the real name of their Jane Doe.
She was able to contact who she thought her family was, and they called me.
We suspect that our victim was Maria Pilar Delgadillo.
What we do is we verify that it's her by getting her DNA from her son and matching it to her original DNA.
The son was this man whose mom had gone missing 40 years before.
I grew up in a big family back then in Mexico. We didn't have a mom because my mom left, and we didn't know anything. At some point, there was a rumor that she was killed. It was just a rumor, supposedly. The detective contacted, and then she started asking me some questions about my mom.
Investigators compare Leonardo Garcia's DNA with a sample from the 1986 Jane Doe.
And it was a 3,400, 3,500 centimorgan match. And we were like, wow. You know, you get excited, and then what kicks in is, wow, this family lost their mother, 40 years ago. Our victim was Maria Pilar Delgadillo.
It was verified. It was her mom. So it was a lot of mixed feelings, like opening a wound, right? And it's even hard to explain all these waves of feelings that I went through. My mom, she was, like I said, strict, but at the same time, she was very playful. She was 42 when she died, and she already had 10 kids. So her first was at 19, and her last, she was 38, if I'm not mistaken. So imagine a 38 with 10 kids in Mexico. Families will have a lot of kids because the oldest will pitch in helping out. So my oldest siblings, they were helping my parents. They went to work and helping to provide with money and so forth. In a way, my mom was ahead of her times because she was strong. She wanted the best for us. She realized that we had a lot of necessities and she wanted to help out. And she knew that something had to be done. And that's how she made the choice to come to the States. It took a lot for her to make that decision. And so she actually talked to one of my oldest brothers. She told him that she was planning to make this trip. And my brother was not happy about it. He told her not to do it. He was thinking about the younger ones, like it would be too much for the family. There was this lady that she used to come back and forth to California. My mom knew that she was leaving. The lady was coming back to the States. And my mom asked her, like, can I tag along? Can I go with you? And she's like, sure. That's how they used to do it before. Like, people will tag along with others to make this trip. That's how she decided. So she didn't did it on her own. She came with another person. I vividly remember her making her suitcase for that. A month after that, we got a letter from San Diego. So it was a letter from my mom. She was about to start working, that she was gonna take care of some kids, and that she was gonna start sending us money. In the second letter, that's when she told us, like, I'm gonna start getting a job. But she didn't give us a lot of details. And then we replied to the letter, and then after that, it was silent. We didn't know anything. I talked to this lady after talking to the detective. So for all these years, I forgot completely that she was around. There was a lot of misconceptions of how things happen. Almost having the idea that my mom left us, like she decided to move on with her life and perhaps have another family. And I grew up thinking that was her choice. I remember seeing this lady. I got her number and actually talked to her. This lady told me that your mom left with the idea to help out your dad and you guys. She was crying the whole time. My cousin, he stopped by the address in San Diego to try to look up for her, but nobody knew about her. So this was in 1986. She left the house late April, and by August, they found her body.
Thanks to investigative genetic genealogy, Maria finally has her identity back, and her family knows why she never returned.
IgG was important in this case because it identified a homicide victim. It allowed investigators an opening into investigating the case in a way they weren't able to in the past. And it also allowed her family to know who she was and where she was found and give them a little bit more information about her circumstances.
It's very satisfying because you're bringing some answers to these people. One, it's a big project that the detective's been working on for 2 years. So it's like any project or anything you're doing that takes a long time and you finally accomplish it, there's a sense of relief. I think what's added on with this is the murder of an innocent person and the family that thought they had abandoned them. So you sort of add that emotion into it. It's hard to describe. It's one of the things that makes this job worth doing.
One burning question remains in this case. Who killed Maria in 1986?
Maria Pilar Delgadillo was killed in 1986 in San Diego County. Her identity remained unknown for almost 40 years until early 2024, when we were able to give her name back. And then at that point, we were able to finally reopen the homicide investigation, and with the hopes of learning who may have been responsible for killing her. Because we now know who she is and know a little bit about her connections to people and her travels, we do have some persons of interest that we are examining. And to date, though, her homicide remains unsolved.
We have significant leads to continue the investigation. And those leads came up pretty quickly once we identified her. And that investigation is ongoing, and we have people that we still want to continue to talk to, and now new evidence to process and compare.
And we're hoping that there's somebody watching this program who may be able to give us some information regarding Maria or whoever was responsible for Maria's death.
My focus was to bring closure, to find closure, and to honor my mom's legacy, my mom's memories. That's the main idea, that I'm willing to share her story. I can't not do anything about who did it, if the person who did it. I trust if some time will come to light, that the authorities will take the steps needed.
Most of them felt like she was deceased. And, we would have liked to have been able to give them a better answer to the story, but the fact that we were able to give them their mom back and give them, I don't know if closure is the right word, but some measure of some knowledge about what happened to their mom was gratifying to us.
Closure means different things to different people. The thing was, we provide some closure to the fact that she just didn't abandon you, but then we basically opened up a new wound with she was murdered. We've gone to some families and solved the murder, but the suspect had died before we solved it. And I want to say we solved the mystery for them, but then there was no one to take to trial. There was no one to seek justice from. So sometimes people's version of closure is different for everybody.
Taking somebody's life could be one of the worst things that can happen. And the fact that, like I said, that currently I don't hold any negative emotions is because I've done some of my own work. I process this and try to find a narrative, and mainly not to affect myself. This is not the same case for my other siblings, especially my older sister. She does ask me, have you talked to the detectives? Is there anything else, any more information? And I tell her that if they do find out, they will let us know. And she believes that there's the need or urgency to keep on asking them. My urgency was to bring my mom to my dad.
They had a funeral for her. Leonardo had it on Facebook, and it was amazing because I popped in there and was watching it, and you could see all the different people in all these different houses in different parts of Mexico that were watching it and crying after almost 40 years. These are people that loved her and knew her.
It was a very beautiful ceremony. Usually funerals are a week or two, or maybe a month after the person passed, not 38 or 39 years after. It was a very beautiful ceremony that the priest was able to discuss forgiveness and being able to move on, and also hope. The priest was able to list all my siblings and myself and my dad, and how mom's death impacted the whole family, and how we grew up not having the mom, and for my siblings to have their kids not having their grandma. Everybody was pleased with the ceremony, with the services. We had a mass, and then went to the cemetery and opened my dad's resting place and put my mom's ashes there. My cousin, Ophelia, she sings beautifully, and she was able to sing a couple songs during the process when they placed the ashes, and it was very emotional. And there was a lot of wind, and actually we took it as if my mom was saying goodbye, or my dad was happy to have my mom's remain with him. So it was a very emotional moment. It was closure for us.
South Salt Lake City, Utah, November 2010. Earl Black returns to his wife's bookstore on their property to find her brutally murdered.
It's hard to imagine for a stranger coming upon such a scene, but imagine if this were your wife, your husband, your loved one, lying on the floor, having been stabbed more than a dozen times.
It is a traumatic scene. Earl's wife, 64-year-old Sherry Black, has been beaten and stabbed to death.
I know he never spent another night in that home, and I can't imagine what he's had to live with, having that image of her in his mind.
The local community is terrorized by the knowledge that there could be a killer among them. Detectives spring into action to track down the unknown assailant.
Is this something that was just personal? Was this just a robbery that maybe went bad? Or is this somebody that's in the community that's going to do this again?
Criminals who have hidden in the shadows discover that there's no escaping science and their own family DNA. Welcome to Bloodline Detectives. Salt Lake City, Utah, a city with a rich history steeped in theology and spirituality.
Salt Lake City, the capital of Utah, was founded by Mormons who were fleeing persecution elsewhere in the country. And Salt Lake became a major center in the Rocky Mountains, a host of the Olympic Games some years ago. South Salt Lake is a very small town, just a few square miles, but with some problems of its own, a higher crime rate, some gang problems, and not quite the image I think that Salt Lake itself would like to project.
It felt safe growing up there. As I got married and moved on, it felt less families and more of kind of a transient, in and out kind of people.
We have a number of different cities within our agency. So as far as the number of cases we get, it varies from year to year. We may have a year with 2 or 3 homicides. We may have a year with 13 or 14 or 15 homicides. As far as other violent crimes, yes, we have rapes, we have robberies, we have burglaries. We have really what any other police agency probably has, even in bigger cities, but probably a little bit less in Salt Lake than like Chicago or New York.
Thursday, November the 30th, 2010, 1:30 p.m. Police receive a disturbing phone call from a local resident.
911, what is the address of the emergency?
Oh, my wife's been murdered.
What address is this at?
3466 South 700 East.
Okay, repeat the address for verification. Okay,
Pardon?
Is she awake?
No, she's dead.
Okay, is she breathing at all?
No, she's dead. She's cold. Oh, my God.
Earl Black came home that afternoon. He left for work that morning, said goodbye to his wife, who was still in her pajamas, and got back, and like any husband coming home would probably be calling out, "Hey, I'm back, I'm home." Started looking for her in the house, could not find her, went into the bookshop adjacent to the house, and worked his way back from the front door through this warren of little areas where books were stacked and shelved to the storeroom where his wife kept her work area and her most valuable books, and found her dead, murdered, slaughtered on the floor.
You can hear the frustration in his voice. He is extremely upset, which is understandable. He indicated that his wife has been murdered. He indicated that he had removed a pair of shearing scissors that were embedded in her chest. The dispatcher was trying to provide Earl with information as far as, and trying to collect information for responding police officers that were responding to that scene.
He kept saying, my wife has been killed, my wife has been killed, and you heard the operator say, is she breathing? He kept repeating in frustration, my wife has been killed.
Is there any serious bleeding?
Oh, just get here.
Okay, I do have help on the way. I need to ask you some more questions just to get help started, okay?
No, just get here.
Okay, I have help on the way too.
When he entered in and found Sherry lying on her back in the back west room of the bookstore, he removed the scissors, and after he removed the scissors, he was wearing a brown leather jacket at the time, and removed that and covered her with the brown leather jacket.
That's exactly what I think any of us would do, to cover up, to give her a sense of decency in this slaughterhouse of death. And so South Salt Lake City police, of course, showed up, and then detectives showed up. This was a grotesque murder, and obviously from the get-go, a complicated one.
At that point, the officers would have gone into the scene to determine if there's any other suspects, the condition of Sherry, and then to back out of the scene once the medical had arrived and sent somebody in to verify that she was actually deceased. Everybody would have backed out and locked that residence and bookstore down to preserve the evidence at the scene. Walking into these scenes, it's really important to just try to keep an open mind, because we really don't want to get ourselves set up in a situation where we're focused on it's going to have to be this, trying to fit that square peg through the round hole. So it's really important in these types of cases to keep an open mind, because it can take us anywhere at that point.
South Salt Lake City Police call in for assistance from Utah Bureau of Forensic Services, who arrive on scene.
We need to know some basic information regarding the type of crime and the basic things that they think occurred at the scene. Most importantly, where the evidence was found.
They would take photos and collect fingerprints, any blood samples, and then they just start working on that evidence that they gathered.
The fact that there was so much blood so far spread around the back room of the bookshop and on the way out indicated the frenzy of the attack, the savagery of the attack, and how many times she had been stabbed so brutally in the back of her head by this long pair of shears.
They identified some blood on a map, a rolled up map. They were also able to identify a belt that was just outside of that west back room that didn't quite fit into the scene. It was just laying on the floor. It was a knockoff Armani Exchange brown belt, 36 to 38 waist size.
That belt had been one of the topics of evidence on all the news stories. It had been put out there. This belt was left at the scene.
And then there was a number of other things, such as books that were collected, blood swabs that were collected, partial fingerprints collected, a palm print that was identified by them and collected. So they did an outstanding job in processing that scene for South Salt Lake.
All of the evidence, as far as the stains and the swabs that were collected, were sent through our typical pathway through the laboratory, where we're able to break open any cells that are within the biological evidence that's collected in order to develop a DNA profile. And we did get what we call a single source DNA profile from the perpetrator, meaning a DNA profile just of that individual, with no other individuals in that particular sample. That can kind of make it a little harder to deal with.
The sea of blood must have been appalling, but it did provide for the investigators not only a lot of blood evidence, but evidence of the nature of the crime, the nature of the killer.
It may possibly be a robbery gone bad. It may have been somebody maybe that Sherry knew or had interacted with at some point that was upset with her about something.
Detectives set out to uncover who brutally murdered Sherry Black, a great-grandmother and beloved member of the local community. Can forensic science unlock the answers and reveal a savage killer? South Salt Lake City, Utah, 2010. Earl Black returns home to his wife's bookstore on their shared property to find her brutally murdered. The beloved 64-year-old great-grandmother, Sherry Black, has been beaten and stabbed to death with kitchen shears. After calling 911, Earl now must deliver the devastating news to the rest of his family.
Heidi had already been concerned because she had tried to call her mother that day. She called her at home, no answer. She called her at the bookshop, no answer.
I just remember having a weird feeling, and that wasn't normal. I mean, I'm sure there were many times that I would call my parents and not get somebody, but usually she would answer her cell phone. And I didn't try to call my dad, which is strange too, but I tried her a number of times. I ran a couple errands. I tried her again. She didn't answer. And I felt something wasn't right.
Sherry had a little pink Motorola flip phone. And to hear Heidi talk about calling and calling and calling and not reaching her mother, I thought of this poignant sense of here's this little pink Motorola phone on the counter somewhere in the bookshop, ringing and ringing and ringing fruitlessly as Heidi's mother lay dead on the floor.
My dad called me and just said, "Someone's killed your mom. Get here quick." And I what? Are you kidding? What? And I just did not comprehend. Was she hit by a car? Was she? I didn't really comprehend what he was saying. So my daughter was there. My daughter Alyssa was there, and she drove us down to my parents' house. And I just remember thinking, if I get there fast enough, maybe I can save her. Maybe she's not gone. And that's how I learned.
I found out my grandma had been killed when my younger sister called me. She was hysterical on the phone and told me grandma had been killed. I didn't get a lot of details. I just got that very basic information and loaded up the car and went straight to her house. The street was lined with ambulances and cop cars and crime scene tape, and as I rounded the corner onto that busy street, that's when it started to sink in for me that this was the gravity of the situation.
I just remember the looks on the officers' faces at the time. You knew it impacted them. It had a big impression on them, and they all had moms. And I knew it was important for them to find the person that did this.
Detectives immediately get to work, canvassing the local area in search for this merciless killer.
Right after the crime was committed, police went out to the neighborhood. They collected whatever video footage they could that was available from businesses or home footage, and also talked to people in the neighborhoods. And then they also talked with the media and had the media put out information on the case and that we were looking for a suspect.
Sherry's body is taken to the morgue in the hope that the autopsy will reveal vital clues about the moments leading up to her death.
It's curious about an autopsy. People think of victims as dead, and they are. But an autopsy is where the victim speaks. The victim's body tells the investigators, tells the coroner, clues and things that happened, tells those stories mutely with what happened to the body, the evidence of the wounds, the nature of the wounds, the defensive wounds.
The true extent of Sherry's injuries can now be revealed.
She had a number of stab wounds in the back of her head, and she had a number of stab wounds to her face. There were a few throughout the body, obviously the scissors that were embedded in her chest. Her carotid artery was cut on her throat. She sustained multiple bruising, blunt force trauma. She sustained some injuries to her hands, to the inside and outside of her hand, which was described as defensive wounds.
Even though she was initially struck in the back, something happened where she fought back. And all of her grandchildren who were talked to by investigators said she was feisty. One friend called her a tough old broad, and the fact that she would have fought back would not have come as a surprise to them.
Sherry's grieving family and friends come together to say their final goodbyes before she is laid to rest.
To be honest, that whole week after losing her is a bit of a blur. We were all still kind of in shock and trying to wrap our heads around what had happened, and I don't remember a lot of the details. I just remember how heartbroken and shocked and just what an awful time it was.
The first days are just kind of a blur. Luckily, I had a lot of support and people that helped and did a lot of heavy lifting, because you're just trying to survive.
The community was very supportive. We felt a lot of love and a lot of support from the community, not just at that time, but for a long time after. People were very caring and concerned, and that meant a lot.
The investigation into Sherry's tragic death is underway. Detectives look into her personal life to gather a sense of what kind of person she was.
Sherry Black seemed to everybody to be this classic grandmother, great-grandmother who enjoyed her work, who loved her family. She volunteered at the local zoo and helped animals that had been injured. She enjoyed her life. She enjoyed her profession. She'd made a career of herself. It's a very male profession: book buying, book selling, book expertise. And she'd cut this niche for herself with this bookshop and had come to learn a great deal about old books, the value of them, especially about Mormon history.
I don't ever remember hearing her talk bad about anybody. She was just a good, kind person. She loved her family passionately, loved being a mom and loved being a grandma.
My grandma she was a lot of fun. I felt like she was my friend. We had a really close bond and a close connection, and I just loved being with her and hanging out with her. And I remember her taking an interest in the music I liked and dancing with me in the car, and she just was always up for anything, and she was just a great, great time.
When I was in high school, we started taking ballet classes together. It just kind of wasn't my thing, but she continued to go on and got on point and performed, and she was just fearless. Just if there was something that she wanted to do, she learned it and took it on and was great.
From as early as I can remember, we would have sleepovers. We'd go rent a movie and get treats, and she'd make dinner, or we'd have pizza, and we just really enjoyed that time together. It was just really, really special time.
We didn't have a lot of money, but we always had what we needed, and we took fun vacations. We had dirt bikes, and so we had our annual dirt bike trips, and we'd go to the desert, and we went camping a lot. We went on river trips. My parents loved to run rivers. Just a lot of outdoor stuff.
Sherry's gruesome death has rocked the tight community of South Salt Lake City.
Why this woman? Why this place? What reason could it have been? And I think people wanted to find a motive, wanted to find a reason, just to get a sense of closure for, well, could it be me next? If things this random can happen to someone this good, who is safe?
There was a lot of fear because of the unknown. Nobody knew who did this crime. They knew it was horrific. There was a lot of news coverage, and it really did rock the community.
Salt Lake City investigators re-examine the crime scene.
There were no signs of forced entry. This was a bookshop that did not keep a door locked once it was open for business. Nobody had broken down a door to get in. Nobody had picked a lock to get in, which I think helped them to fix the frame of the time of death, the time of the attack, that the door was not locked.
It It soon emerges that a male customer arrived at the store that morning.
Based on the information from the telephone call to the customer that had called Sherry at 9:53 a.m., and then when the customer arrived, he indicated that he arrived approximately at 1:30 p.m. as well. So we really have a very short window when this would have occurred. So it would have had to have been after 9:53 and prior to 10:30. So we have less than an hour that everything occurred and this person was gone.
Detectives now believe that Earl may be a suspect.
In all of these cases, quite honestly, everybody is a person of interest or a potential suspect until we can determine that that's not the case, whether it be through interviews, fingerprints, DNA, whatever it may be.
If it looks like it's a crime of passion, many times it's related to a spouse or some other type of person who had a close connection. And that's usually what law enforcement looks at first, is the people that knew the deceased, and then they work their way on a larger scale, looking at others like strangers and people in the community. But usually it starts with who the individual knew at the time.
I don't think it took long to rule him out. He had an alibi and he was distraught, and I think it didn't take long to rule him out.
Earl Black was questioned by police and eliminated on several counts. One of them, the fact that he had an alibi. Another, the really pretty clear-cut evidence from the surveillance cameras at the bookstore when he had left the house in the morning and when he came back several hours later into the bookstore to find his wife dead.
We're going to look at friends and family. We're going to start looking at business associates, customers. We're looking at everything at this point.
Once the family had been ruled out, police began to look at so many other possibilities, specifically a business dispute. In Utah, the business of old Mormon documents and books is very profitable and also very competitive. Some of these books, $1,000, $5,000, or even as much as $50,000. And Sherry had a safe with a lot of these rare and old Mormon books in it. As competitive as this business is, there would be natural reason for police to think that it may have been a competitor or someone who wanted a book and didn't want to pay for it, who had gone into the shop and killed Sherry. But that was a well that also came up dry.
They try to figure out what type of individual would commit this crime, to see if there's any individuals that are in the neighborhood or have a likelihood of committing that type of crime. They will look at people who have just been released from prison, and then they continue to do the media stories so the story doesn't get forgotten by the community, because we always know someone in the community most likely heard or saw something. They just can't relate it to the incident.
She was stabbed 12, 15, 17 times, which to an investigator might suggest this was somebody who knew you and was very angry with you. And that's one of the reasons that police also looked at the circle of people she worked with, the booksellers, anybody she may have encountered in her volunteer work, somebody who might have had some reason to dislike her, to distrust her, to be angry with her, and to attack her.
There was a couple of other cases that initially thought that there were similarities in other states, but ultimately came back and it was not a match either in those cases. But yeah, I mean, I think you're looking everywhere and anywhere for anything that potentially could help in these types of investigations. And it's just important that you try to cover all your bases in order to get the story and hopefully lead us to the perpetrator.
With still no end in sight, will forensics help to find this vicious killer? South Salt Lake City, Utah, 2010. Earl Black returns home to his wife's bookstore on their shared property to find her brutally murdered. 64-year-old great-grandmother Sherry Black has been beaten and stabbed to death with kitchen shears. As Sherry's family struggles to come to terms with their loss, investigators are tasked with finding the man who killed her.
When you're listening to the family say how much hurt they had because what they suffered by losing their mother, their grandmother, but also because the individual had not been apprehended. It created a fear in the family and more heartache because they just wanted some justice.
They kept it in the media, billboards, reward money, trying to solicit tips or any type of leads in the case. They really did everything that they could possibly do to get the information out there and keep the information out there, hoping that leads would come forward or people eventually would maybe speak up and say something to where it might lead investigators to the perpetrator.
Even though the police were very frustrated, they were aided in keeping the case in front of the public by Sherry's family. They would annually hold vigils on the anniversary to remind people that this was still unsolved. They had that immense reward out there of at least $100,000. They were very much front and center in the public eye for years to make sure that Sherry's killer was found and brought to justice.
We had, I think, 86 different individuals or persons of interest DNA samples over the next decade.
Investigators decide to input the killer's DNA sample into CODIS.
CODIS stands for the Combined DNA Index System, and it is a nationwide database of convicted offenders and arrestee samples. It allows us to enter profiles that are developed off of evidence from putative perpetrators in order to potentially identify the individual.
When he was attacking her, he had cut himself, and when he was leaving, he shut the door to the back room where she was and left a partial palm print in his blood on the door. So we had his DNA.
And of course, it's a natural that detectives and investigators would turn to this system to put the DNA into it to see what kind of hits, what kind of reaction it would get, and perhaps find the name, the identity of the killer.
All of those individuals' DNA profiles were compared back to that unknown male DNA profile on the evidence from the crime scene, and none of them matched.
They retrieved DNA. There was some blood on a rolled up map that was leaning against the wall directly next to the doorway leading into the back west room. It was uploaded into CODIS, but unfortunately that did not come back to anybody either. I mean, is it somebody that's young? Could that be the case because they're not in CODIS? Could it be somebody that's never been caught? Is it somebody that has been caught for other crimes but didn't lead up to that? Or is it somebody that has been caught for a violent crime that for whatever reason it was overlooked and their DNA wasn't collected?
The years pass by and little progress is made on the case. Still, Detective Pender refuses to give up and remains in close contact with Sherry's family.
I think the fact that they knew that Sherry wasn't forgotten, that things were happening on the case, and recognizing that sometimes things do take time. At this time, this case in March of 2018 had been transferred over to the Unified Police Department, and I was assigned this case as the lead investigator.
We're a large organization. We have tools that some smaller police departments don't have, and we can dedicate a full-time detective to the case. So I agreed to do that. I had full confidence that our cold case unit could do a lot on the case and most likely solve the case.
That's when I feel like it really, I knew he was working on it. We would meet with him every few months, and he would just go through his notebook and just have pages and pages of things that he was looking into.
Detective Pender had heard about forensic genetic genealogy and had wondered if that was something that could be pursued in this case, since we still had not identified who the perpetrator was. I told him that we did have very good evidence from the crime scene. There was plenty of DNA left over, and that I thought it was a good idea for him to pursue that testing.
In 2015, Detective Bender and his team hear about Parabon Nanolabs, a company specializing in DNA phenotyping, a process where scientists predict physical characteristics of a person by looking at their DNA.
They can take DNA from a crime scene and they can actually provide us the finished product is with an image and with percentages of images. And what I mean by the image, it's not a photograph, it would be an image of this is maybe the color of the hair they would have and what the percentage that is likely that they have that color of hair or eye color. Those types of things they were able to kind of predict, but with a percentage of confidence as well.
The more details that we can have about a crime, the better. But we don't necessarily need to have that because the DNA is going to tell the story. If we are given the information of where and when that crime occurred, that can really help us narrow down the potential persons of interest. We're looking for someone who has to be a certain age range in order to have been that suspect. And if we can find branches of the family tree that are closer to that crime scene, then those are going to be of higher interest typically than people who live much further away.
The way Parabon reviewed this case is they would actually give it a numbering system. And what I mean by that is they had a number range from 1 to 5. So 1 would be, we could probably solve this overnight, and 5 would be, it's probably not worth you even spending any money on this case because there's no chance we're going to be able to solve this case. So as they reviewed Sherry's case, they came back to me before we decided to go this route. They came back to me and said, we have given this case a 4-. So it definitely caused a little pause, but we have to do whatever we can in any of these types of cases and think outside the box. It was a 4-, but it wasn't a 5. So that gave me some hope that we might be able to do something with this. So my agency and the sheriff agreed to pay for us to start working on this genetic genealogy with Parabon.
We need hundreds of thousands of genetic markers that are called SNPs. So Parabon analyzed that DNA using a more advanced technology than had been used previously. That revealed additional information about this individual. It showed us that he was African American, and he had some Puerto Rican ancestry as well.
Once the police put together this DNA composite image of the person they were looking for as Sherry's killer, they put it out into the world and they got 60 different leads. 60 people called and said, I think I know who that is. The police did DNA testing on each of those people and each one of them was excluded as the killer.
It's a devastating blow to the investigation. Over 60 leads from the snapshot phenotype and not a single DNA hit. Despite the odds stacked against them, the case file does not close. Parabon Nanolabs are utilizing a new technique to solve cold cases, investigative genetic genealogy. Can this tool finally reveal Sherry's killer? South Salt Lake City, Utah. Detectives are investigating the 2010 murder of 64-year-old Sherry Black, who was stabbed to death in her bookstore. The case goes cold, but in 2015, Parabon Nanolabs, experts in forensic technology, create a snapshot profile of the killer's physical traits using the DNA left at the scene. Once again, all leads run dry. But in 2018, Parabon utilized groundbreaking techniques to try to solve this case once and for all.
This case took a lot of collaborative work between the genetic genealogist and Detective Ben Pender. This meant that it took about 2 years for us to finally zero in on the right family. So in 2020, the case finally really started moving forward at a fast pace. And we advised Detective Pender to go out to Sacramento to talk to a family that we thought might be closely related to the perpetrator.
One of the individuals that was already on the list that she had asked me to go talk to had all of a sudden kind of rose to the top of the list. Another distant relative had put their information into GEDmatch, which actually brought us a lot closer to this individual. And I was informed this person was residing in the Sacramento, California area and was asked to travel there and meet and try to obtain ancestry information. Also, I was aware that there was an adult son. And again, I was asked to speak with him and obtain his information and see if I couldn't obtain a reference sample from both him and his mother.
Detective Pender decides to speak to the mother first.
When she was asked about a potential family member who may have lived in the Salt Lake City area, she revealed that there was someone from their family that had been placed for adoption. When this woman's son gave the name of the woman he had the relationship with that had placed the son for adoption, we jumped into action and we ended up finding the obituary for the maternal grandmother of this adopted son.
And in that obituary, it actually says his first and a last name. It said Antonio Spencer. I was looking in our databases and I just could not find anywhere where there was an individual that would match up in the potential age frame of somebody who could have committed this crime. So as we kept looking, I came across something with a first name of Adam Antonio Spencer Durborough. And we were able to determine that he was actually removed at some point when he was young from his mother's custody. He was taken into state custody, had been into foster care, ultimately was adopted by somebody by the last name of Durborough. And I was able to identify who he was. It appeared that he was still living in Utah. He was actually residing south of Salt Lake County, about 25 miles or 25 minutes away from where Earl and Sherry's bookstore was located.
They had a name, Adam Durborough. This was going to be their man, but they had to get the evidence to pull it all together. And what they did was to go after his genetic evidence, his DNA, without him knowing about it. They knew where he worked, they followed him, they saw him order fast food and go back to work. He worked at a Walmart. And they went to his car, photographed the contents of his car, which was a lot of junk food containers, fast food containers, and then were able to get those containers out of his car and take them in for testing. And things like a soda straw showed that exactly what they had predicted was going to be through the testing was true, that Adam Durborough was their man.
As Adam was walking into the Walmart, there was 6 or 7 plainclothes detectives. We had identifiers on jackets and things such as that indicating we were the police. Approached Adam. He immediately put his hands behind his back. He said, "I know what this is about." He indicated that he knew this was about the Sherry Black case. And I get him in my vehicle and let him know that he is under arrest for this homicide and that we are going to be transporting him back to our office to speak with him. Do you have any idea why you're here today, Adam?
Pretty solid idea.
Okay. The reason you're here today is you're here because of the Sherry Black case. Okay? And we don't have you here because we're wondering if you did it or not. I know you did it, okay? I've been working this case for over 5 years. You've probably even seen me on TV before working this case, but I've been very active in this case, and today's the day really that I wanted to try to have an opportunity to talk to you about the why. It's not a matter of who, it's about the why. I want to be able to talk to the family and tell them, listen, this is what happened and this is why it happened.
This was almost exactly 10 years after Sherry's murder. And Adam Durborough was in a solemn frame of mind, as you would expect, being taken into custody for a murder that had been committed 10 years ago. And he was informed of his Miranda rights, but gradually he started to talk to police about himself, about his family, about his circumstances growing up, and eventually got around to the crime itself.
He indicated that he had a therapy appointment around 11 or 11:30 that day in that general location. And as he was walking by, he said he just happened to notice that bookstore there. He indicated that he had never been in that bookstore before. He loves books, so he decided to go in and take a look at what kind of books were in that store.
I don't know. I was just looking through. There's no one else in the store. It just happened. She was there, and it's a mistake that I wish every day that I had never ever made. When you guys stopped me today, I knew. I mean, I haven't done anything else in my life. But I definitely felt some relief.
By his own admission, she was kind to him, and that's what set him off. I also wonder if her spidey senses, her intuition was kind of telling her that something was off, and that provoked him, or I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
On October 10th, 2020, they brought us in and told us that they had arrested a person named Adam Durborough in Utah County, and that he was in custody and that he had confessed on his way there.
My sister and I went to the police station, and I remember waiting on the lawn for my parents to finish the meeting. And my parents coming out and saying they got him. They have him. And it was just a huge amount of relief that washed over me, knowing that the person who had done this to her had been caught. It was a great moment.
For 10 years, you wonder what it's going to be like and how you'll feel when you get that answer. And you just can't describe it. I don't have the words for it. It was just such a relief.
So who exactly is Adam Durborough? Investigators dig into his past to get a better sense of the killer.
Adam Durborough had a difficult upbringing. His father had a criminal record and spent time in prison. He himself was adopted and also spent time with foster care families in the care of the state of Utah.
He had a fairly extensive juvenile criminal history of some violent crimes and other crimes. His adult history, however, there was only 2 arrests that he had, and those were both misdemeanor arrests for theft. So that's all he had as far as his criminal history goes as him being an adult.
His attorney said that he would plead guilty if we would take the death penalty off the table. And that was an easy one for us, because if he would plead guilty, then we wouldn't have to do a trial. And the trial was the thing that I think I was most afraid of. My dad having to testify to finding my mom and just be up on that stand. And, you never know if there's one jury member that finds him not guilty. So for me, I think for our family, it was an easy, if he can spend life without parole, happy to take the death penalty off.
Does the sentencing of life without parole bring a sense of closure to Sherry's family?
I feel like it brought closure for our family. I feel like, we'll never have my mom back. My dad will never have his wife back, and that hurts, and it's really painful. But the 10 years of wanting answers and not getting answers, and always, looking over your shoulder, wondering, is it them? Is that the person? Are we ever going to find the person? And just the anniversary comes around and it opens up the wounds. And so finally having answers has helped us heal and brought us closure. And I think that day, the sentencing, for my dad was a day that he could start to really move forward.
This will be something that I will remember my entire life. But the positive, if there is a positive to come out of this, is the family actually began starting to help others in law enforcement, started a foundation, and are actually out helping others in these types of cases try to resolve their cases as well.
With all we had learned and all the people that we had met and the resources that we had, my husband and I felt like we needed to give back and help other families that are experiencing what we experienced. And so we created the Sherry Black Foundation so that we could help bridge those gaps and bring law enforcement together and promote collaboration and learning and help families get their cases solved. My heart always hurt for families who have loved ones that pass away, that get killed, that don't know how to advocate for themselves or how to get answers or how to get help. And they have to live with what we lived with for 10 years. And it breaks my heart because it's so painful. It's hard to move forward when you don't have those answers. So we just always felt like where we can make a difference and where we can do some good, it's our responsibility.
Detectives reflect on the importance of forensic investigative genetic genealogy in finally bringing answers to Sherry's family.
Could this case have been solved without that? I don't think so. None of the standard connections and questions, family, grudges, motives, none of that happened. It all came up dry. It was just by happenstance that this DNA program, this DNA technology could put this together like solving a puzzle and come up with Adam Durboro's name.
I miss everything about her, and it just kind of depends on the time. I miss just being able to call her and share things with her. I miss sharing. I have 15 grandchildren now, and she loved being a grandma, and I wish I could share those grandkids with her. She would love being a great grandma to them, and she would love watching me be a grandma, and I miss being able to share that with her, and just conversations, it was just easy with her, and I just miss her.
Marinette County, Wisconsin, 1976. In an area thought to be safe for campers, a loving couple meets a cruel end.
David was deceased outside of a rustic campground toilet.
He had been shot once in the neck, but once was all it took. This was a fatal shot with a lot of blood.
400 yards away in ferns and bushes and brush in the woods, they found the female victim.
She too had been killed by 2 shots, but not until after she had been raped.
What could drive a person to commit such a monstrous act?
This was sexually motivated. He wanted to sexually assault Ellen, but he had to get rid of David to do that.
Campers report sightings of a mysterious individual lurking in the park.
They saw an individual walking out of the woods carrying a rifle.
2 people killed. The woman is brutally raped. The people in the community would be afraid and shocked and dismayed that it would happen here.
Police follow all leads, but the case turns cold.
They worked on it very, very hard for several years and followed several leads, and nothing seemed to pan out.
Police just ran out of options, ran out of possibilities, and nothing further could be done.
It seems the killer got away with it. That is, until new forensic science becomes available. Criminals who have hidden in the shadows for years find there's no escaping science and their own family DNA. Welcome to Bloodline Detectives. McClintock County Park, a scenic natural park located in Marinette County, Wisconsin. In 1976, it's a popular spot for camping and outdoor activities.
Marinette County is a very rural area in northeastern Wisconsin. A large portion of it is wooded. It has a large county national forest.
McClintock County Park has a small campground on the south part of it, and north part of it there's another parking area. There's some hiking trails there.
It's a very, very secluded park. It's kind of a big circular driveway that has little offshoots that are campsites. It's maybe a 1 acre park. It borders a little creek.
But in this seemingly serene park, a shocking discovery is about to be made.
On July 9th, 1976, a park caretaker, his name was Stanley, he went into the camp area, and when he got to the restroom, which is basically like an outhouse, he saw a body.
It's not the type of thing anybody would normally find or see, and I would assume that he was terrified and kind of shaken and didn't really know what to do.
He went up to the male and couldn't get a response, and so there was no telephone in McClintock Park at that time. And right after he made this discovery, there was another man, Lance Temper. He and his girlfriend were happened to drive through the McClintock Park camping area, and Stanley flagged him down and said, hey, there's this man over here that's not responsive. Lance Temper was actually an off-duty Marinette police officer. And so Lance Temper went over and discovered that the male was deceased. And so Stanley, after hearing that, drove up to Goodman Park, which had a telephone, and that's about a 10-minute drive.
After rushing to Goodman Park, Stanley comes across the payphone.
And so then Stanley went up and called Marinette County Dispatch and was received at like 2:53 p.m. The first patrol officer was Deputy Giroux, and so he went there and, yes, helped to secure the scene basically with tape, indicating that it was a police scene and then people could not enter without authorization.
They knew enough that this was probably going to be a big enough scene that they needed to contact the State Division of Justice. So basically they had just secured the scene that night as it was getting close to dark when most help was able to arrive, and waited until the crime lab and Department of Justice arrived in the morning.
When they arrived and they saw the body of the male by the women's restroom there, they looked around. Basically what he was wearing was a t-shirt, some shorts. He had a camera that had been around his neck. He had a hat that was not on his head anymore, but was on the ground next to him.
Items of clothing that may be damp or whatever, you want to make sure that you put those in paper bags and preserve them, not in plastic bags. If you put them in plastic bags, the evidence will deteriorate quickly. The Sheriff's Office did an excellent job of preserving the crime scene and immediately requesting a field response unit from the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory, rather than trying to pick up things on their own that they may or may not have handled appropriately.
They also found a wallet as well, and that was significant because if it had been a robbery, then they would have expected that valuables would have been taken, and that was not the case.
They found a billfold that had his identification in it, and they got his name off of that.
The male victim was identified as David Schuldes.
After identifying the homicide victim, detectives search the area for more evidence. They discover a nearby tent where further horror awaits them.
When the officers went and viewed the tent, they were able to determine that there was probably a female who was with him, but not, of course, located at the scene at that time.
Now, Lance Temper had gone to the campsite. There was a car, an AMC Gremlin, and had looked inside the car, and he noted a female's purse inside the car. But at that point, they did not locate the female.
It was shortly after they began the search that they did locate the body of Ellen Matthews. They located her about 150 yards away from David, and he was in a wooded area, and she was partially clothed.
There was a short sleeve summer weight sweater that was partially over her head. It appeared to investigators that she was possibly had been stripped because the undergarments were gone, but the shorts were partially on.
They did locate her underwear about 10 to 15 feet away from the body.
In Wisconsin, the coroner is called to the scene of any unexpected death and any violent death. The coroner makes the pronouncement of death. The bodies would have been transported to Madison.
During the autopsy, they're looking for the cause and manner of death.
It was determined that David Schultes died pretty much immediately with a gunshot wound to the neck. Ellen Matthews, it was determined that she had died from 2 gunshot wounds, one to the chest, one to the upper abdomen.
She likely was shot in the abdomen first. That would not have killed her. It would have dropped her to the ground. The shot that likely would have killed her would have been the shot to the right breast, going out the left breast, because it transected the aorta and the heart.
Because of some of the scrapes and scratches and cuts and the semen found in her shorts, it pretty much determined that there was a sexual assault that occurred. By all accounts from the parents and from her friends and family, she would not have fought back. She was one that was not into confrontation. She was very meek, mild-mannered. At one point, she had even had a conversation with her mother about if something would ever have happened like that, would she fight back? And she replied, no, she would just let it happen and pray to God that she lived to get through it.
Marinette County detectives attend the funerals of both victims on the off chance they notice attendees acting suspiciously.
They went to the young couple's funeral and were vigilant for people who were not members of the family, were not friends, who were hanging out there for what reason? Because sometimes killers do get a kick out of seeing how people react to their crimes, the mourning, the grief that people are suffering. Some of them, shall we say, get off on it.
It's just one more step that police departments and sheriff's offices can take to try and develop information when none exists. It's got to be extremely devastating. I simply can't imagine going through that. I have a young daughter who enjoys camping and goes camping by herself. And every time she does that, I worry about it because of my memory of this case.
The people in the community would be afraid and shocked and dismayed that it would happen here. 2 people killed, the woman is brutally raped, and we don't know who the person is.
Investigators are now on the hunt for suspects in this double homicide, but will their leads be strong enough to catch this cold-blooded killer? In McClintock County Park, Marinette County, Wisconsin, a young couple are brutally murdered on July the 9th, 1976, in the popular camping ground. The victims are identified as a soon-to-be married couple, 25-year-old David Schultes and 24-year-old Ellen Matthews. Schultes had been shot in the neck, and tragically, Matthews had been sexually assaulted before being fatally shot by the killer.
David was a 25-year-old male. He was attending the University of Wisconsin in Green Bay and worked at the Green Bay newspaper. Ellen, she had graduated from the University of Wisconsin Green Bay and worked in the library there. They were a happy young couple and they were engaged.
They had no enemies and they just enjoyed getting out in nature and spending time together.
They like to camp and they like to get away and do things. Appeared by all accounts to just be a young couple in love, planning to be married later that year, and they were excited about that.
In '76, it was pretty rare to see any kind of homicides or violent crimes being committed in Marinette or Marin County.
It just always stood out to me as like, how could something like this happen there?
In fact, to this day, people don't go to McClintock Park out of fear and because of what had occurred there.
Marinette County detectives appealed to the local community for any information that could lead them to the killer.
They went all over Marinette County to different convenience stores, campgrounds, just any place that people would have frequented, trying to see if anybody saw anyone suspicious or anything suspicious. They did an immense amount of work on the ground to try to develop any type of lead.
People went to Goodman Park a lot more than they did McClintock because of the amenities. There was electricity there was showers and things like that up in that park in the 70s. It was a little more popular with campers to be up there. Our victims attempted to go to that park prior to settling on McClintock Park, but that park was full with campers. One of them being an individual that was camping in Goodman Park at the time. He believed he'd seen them about 1:30 time frame drive through Goodman Park where he was camping. Later that afternoon, a short time later, him and his family went for a ride and went down to McClintock Park. As they were driving through the park, they did notice the same vehicle. So they made note of it again and said, hey, there's that car again. It was a purple colored Gremlin, and the Gremlin was our victim's car. And they didn't think much of it until, of course, the news broke that there was a double homicide in that park. They arrived approximately 2 p.m. on July 9th, 1976. Set up their camp, put things away. Their tent was very neat and tidy. David did enjoy taking pictures of the wildlife and things like that. So finding him with a camera around his neck, officers at the time believed that they were probably attempting to go for a nature walk and see some of the wildlife in the area. Ellen had to use the bathroom, so she went into one of the outhouses, and when David was waiting outside, somebody from a distance fired a round and shot him through his neck with a high-powered rifle. At that point, Ellen was taken from the bathroom, marched into the wooded area where she was sexually assaulted. After the sexual assault occurred, the suspect allowed her to put her jean shorts back on, and as she was putting her shirt back over her head, when it just got over her head, is when we believe the shots were fired, striking her in the chest and the abdomen, killing her.
A murder like this, in such a peaceful, quiet place of such a young couple, with so few clues, would make people panic, would frighten them into thinking there's someone out there who is killing people, who is still out there doing this, and will he do it again?
As the word got out about the murders in McClintock Park, some information was generated. There was a person that had camped in McClintock Park earlier that week and had said that during the night he heard some noise outside of his camper and was concerned, but he thought it might be a bear. So he had a rifle in his camper, and he opened the door of his camper and fired the shot, and he heard some commotion, and that was the end of that. Never any idea if it was a raccoon, a bear, or a person. There were two other people that came forth with information. They were two police officers from Green Bay, Wisconsin, which is about an hour south of Marinette County. He and his wife and another officer and his wife were there camping prior to the murders in McClintock Park. As they were sitting around a campfire in the evening, they said they noticed a person standing off some distance in the woods. They could see the silhouette of an individual standing there. They started to walk toward that individual, and the person disappeared. So they came back, sat around the campfire some more, got a little bit later in the evening, and noticed a silhouette some distance away in the woods again. That time, instead of going toward the individual, they went to their tent to retrieve their service weapon. When they came back, the individual was gone again. At the time, they thought it was suspicious. but didn't give it a lot of thought until they also learned of the murders in McClintock Park, and at that time they came forward with that piece of information.
While examining the vicinity of the crime scene, investigators locate a vital piece of evidence.
Investigators recovered a bullet fragment, a jacket from a fence that was outside of the outhouse. That bullet had gone through David's throat, and that one had grooves and striations on it that the crime lab was able to tell our investigators that if you locate this gun, we can positively ID it. So a lot of effort went into looking for a .30 caliber rifle, which is what they determined caused the homicide.
Unfortunately, .30 caliber weapons are extremely common in northern Wisconsin. It's a very common hunting weapon. So in the course of the investigation, we collected a number of weapons, .30 caliber weapons, and submitted them to the crime laboratory, none of which of course matched the bullets that were recovered at the scene.
The day after these homicides occurred, 2 young men indicated to their parents that they might have seen the suspect in the case. McClintock Park has a sister park that is actually a walking park. It's about a half a mile north of the campgrounds. And they had stopped there at the time, and they were walking around down by the river when they heard a gunshot.
Sounded like a rifle shot. These were young men that were experienced hunters and grew up around that, so they knew what a rifle shot sounded like.
Those 2 got back in the vehicle, and then they traveled out to the main road, and they drove south towards McClintock Park Campground. As they were driving, they look off to the right, and they see an individual who they described as about 20 to 30 years old, dressed in a military-style jacket, wearing boots, and carrying what they thought was like a .30 caliber rifle. And he was walking through the woods at a pretty good pace. They assumed he was about 15 to 20 feet away from them when they drove by.
Unusual, but not unheard of. People do hunt out of season. That's called poaching. That does happen here. And so that's kind of what they thought was happening. Somebody was hunting out of season.
And didn't give it a whole lot more thought until they heard about the homicide investigation.
So they briefly caught a glimpse of this man and described that man to law enforcement as best they could. Law enforcement engaged the services of a composite artist, and they developed a pretty rudimentary sketch of this person that they saw. There was also, on the other side of the road from where this man had been spotted, the other side of Parkway Road, a Plymouth vehicle, and one of the young men was able to give a partial license plate. It appeared to be like a Michigan license plate.
Well, obviously, one of the first things that we did was contact the Michigan State Police and got a printout of any license plate that could possibly come up with that combination.
So law enforcement went off what they had, which was this person walking with the .30 caliber rifle and the description and the composite, as well as looking for this vehicle. They went and scoured all of the surrounding campgrounds or convenience stores, any place that may have information where somebody may have driven through. And so then asked people if they had seen a vehicle similar to the one found across the road, if they had seen anyone matching that description or seen anything suspicious at all, or if they had seen Ellen and David. Unfortunately, the leads really weren't significant at that time. The main thing they were focusing on, again, was the composite sketch. That's really the only thing that they had that was solid at the time.
I put together the sightings by the 2 Green Bay police officers and the murders in McClintock Park. I was convinced that it was somebody who was either from the area or had been in the area, or at the very least was very comfortable in the woods. And unfortunately, the 2/3 of northern Wisconsin is a wooded area, and there are lots of people that are comfortable in the woods.
Investigators are unable to identify the mysterious man in the woods. Weeks turn into months without new leads. Despite their best efforts, Marinette County investigators are losing momentum.
In the later 70s, it really dropped off, not due to lack of effort or lack of wanting to solve the crime. They had gone through all the investigative leads that they could, and it didn't lead them anywhere to a resolution.
It was a cold case because of how old it was getting, but it certainly was one that if somebody wanted to say something, if something came our way, it was investigated. So it never really was inactive, but we all had our moments of doubt. Are we ever going to be able to solve this?
The case may be cold, but Marinette detectives do not give up hope of solving this harrowing double homicide. As the years pass, advancements in forensic technology offer newfound hope. Can the killer's DNA unlock the key to this mystery? Marinette County, Wisconsin. On July the 9th, 1976, 25-year-old David Schuldes and his girlfriend, 24-year-old Ellen Matthews, are discovered murdered in McClintock County Park. Both victims tragically died from gunshot wounds, and even more disturbing, Ellen was sexually assaulted prior to her death. The double homicide investigation is underway, but new leads are scarce.
Back in 1976, technology was a little bit different than it is now, and they relied heavily on fingerprints and serology and blood typing. The serology is like the analysis of fluids, and then blood typing, if they have blood available, they can like do a type of like A, B, O, or whatever. And in some fluids, like semen, some men are excretors, and you can determine their blood type because they are excretors.
Typically, the best result comes from a blood sample. However, we also can get very pristine DNA samples from semen.
Using the biological samples taken from Ellen's clothing, investigators identify the blood type of the killer.
All we had was the fact that the person was a type O blood and was a secretor, and unfortunately type O positive is the most common blood type, and so that didn't help us much as far as identifying anyone. It was extremely important that evidence be collected properly. It was extremely critical that our state crime laboratory preserve that evidence, and as long as it was preserved and was able, as technology improved, to eventually develop a DNA profile.
Despite this solid lead, the case once again turns cold. Then, in the mid-90s, a new generation of detectives pull the infamous case off the shelf.
Detective Sergeant Craig Bates, he was tasked with investigating the old homicide cases that were not resolved in Marinette County, and one of them was the McClintock County Park homicides. The early 90s was kind of the start of using DNA in police work.
Detective Bates learns about advancements in DNA profiling and considers whether an updated analysis of the biological sample can lead to a suspect.
And he took some of the evidence from the case and sent it to a couple of different labs throughout the country that did DNA analysis, and they were able to develop a DNA profile from the semen that was in the shorts. That profile was entered into the CODIS, which is Combined DNA Identification System. It's a computerized database for known offenders and for unknown suspects, and they kind of compare them on a regular basis. So if you have an unknown suspect profile, you import that into the DNA database, and if it matches, you'll get a notification that there's a match.
The results were negative. We weren't able to connect our suspect's DNA with any other suspects in the United States or any other crimes in the United States. Either the suspect committed another homicide and was in prison and never did have to give his DNA, or the suspect was dead, or maybe on the off end that somebody who did something this heinous maybe just didn't do it again and never was caught. So ultimately we knew our suspect in the case had never had to submit any kind of DNA to the state.
Despite being unable to locate a match to the suspect profile in the CODIS database, investigators make progress in 2018 thanks to a DNA technology company based in Virginia.
Parabon is a genetic technology company. So they do a number of things, and those include snapshot phenotyping, where they can predict someone's physical traits based on their DNA. So hair color, eye color, shape, face, skin color. If they are contracted to do so from law enforcement, they can create an image that is an approximation of what someone would look like, just based on their DNA. So it's not meant to be a photographic image of somebody. However, it should be consistent with that person's traits.
Detective Baldwin came in to see me and said, we need to talk about this. We want your take on this. This is something we should pursue in this case because we have this profile. When I started watching what Parabon Nanolabs was doing and CeCe Moore's work and her associates' work, I almost came off of my chair. I remember thinking, my goodness, yes, we have to do that.
We primarily work cases where there's an unidentified violent criminal, a rapist or a murderer. Many of these cases are very old. They've been cold cases for years or decades. We also work some more active cases. So what we are trying to do is help law enforcement identify the person responsible for a violent crime. And if it's a more active case, we might even be able to help them stop that criminal in their tracks.
And we coordinated with the crime lab and them to provide the DNA sample to them so they could do their work on it.
And Parabon did do a phenotype sketch of the suspect based on the DNA found in Ellen Matthews' shorts.
They told us that it was a male primarily of Northern European descent, fair complected, either like reddish or light brown hair, blue eyes, and probably had some freckling. It was like 40 years after the event, so if he was 25 at the time, 65 would have been his approximate age, we thought, when we conducted the sketch through Parabon. After we did get that sketch, we had a press conference and put that out to the TV stations.
To the newspapers and to the public, asking if there were any new leads or information that could be generated based on the suspect, having these particular physical characteristics.
And we developed probably about 70 leads from various people. We started to track down these people and talk to them. Hey, what do you know about this case? Would you be willing to consent to give us DNA to compare in the case?
And we were able to go out and swab each one of those individuals. None of the 70, of course, ever hit on the DNA profile that our suspect had.
The suspect is yet to be found, but investigators continue in progressing the case. They team up with Parabon Nanolabs once again to try a revolutionary forensic technique that is cracking the coldest of cold cases across the country.
So when Parabon told us about the sketch and the genetics of the person, they said another service they do is this investigative genetic genealogy, and they told us that based on the person's DNA, they could compare DNA to people that are in other data banks and try to match DNA and build family trees from that.
I'm one of the early pioneers of using autosomal DNA to help people learn more about their family tree and their genetic heritage. Autosomal DNA is the type of DNA you inherit from all of your great-grandparents back to your third and fourth great-grandparents. So you inherit 50% from your mother and your father, everyone does, about 25% from each of your grandparents, and about 12.5% from each great-grandparent. And so it can inform us about all the different branches of your family tree. And it became apparent very early on in my work that this incredibly powerful tool for human identification was applicable to law enforcement cases, both unidentified human remains and identifying unknown violent criminals.
On December the 21st, 2018, Parabon Nanolabs provide Marinette County investigators with a strong lead. The genealogists have generated a pool of suspects using the killer's DNA. They suspect he belongs to the Van Evenhoven family from the Green Bay area, Wisconsin.
They had a number of children, including 4 sons. They looked at the Van Evenhoven sons in the beginning of 2019.
Todd Baldwin was the primary lead investigator in this case, and the first of the brothers that they focused on was the closest in age to what we thought the person was, and they wound up doing a garbage or a trash pick at his house.
As soon as he put the garbage out, me and another detective went, obtained the garbage.
And they went through it and they developed things out of the garbage that they thought would contain DNA.
One of them being an inhaler.
The DNA collected from that garbage pull, it was in the right family, according to the crime lab, but not the right person. Investigators progressed down to another brother who lived up in Florence County. An investigator named Tom Shallow has a cabin just down the road from this other brother. And he said, yeah, he comes over for coffee all the time. So one day, the brother came over for coffee. Tom picked the coffee cup up and sent that in as well. And that was the same thing. Same family, wrong brother. That narrowed us down to 2 brothers. One was deceased, and then we had Ray, who was still alive.
Detectives waste no time tracking down Raymond Van Evenhoven to get a DNA sample from him. Are investigators finally about to corner this elusive killer? Marinette County, Wisconsin, 2019. Detectives are investigating the 1976 murder of 25-year-old David Schuldes and 24-year-old Ellen Matthews, who were shot in McClintock Park. Tragically, Ellen was also sexually assaulted prior to her death. Now, over 40 years later, Parabon Nanolabs, utilizing investigative genetic genealogy, have narrowed the suspect list down to 4 brothers. Detectives run further DNA tests, which rules out 3 brothers, leaving just one, Raymond Van Evenhoven.
Raymond lived in a real remote area on a dead-end road. And I surveilled him for approximately a month, was unable to ever obtain any kind of DNA left behind from him. And he also didn't have a garbage pickup where he was located. You had to take your garbage to the dump. So it was going to be hard to obtain garbage from him. So I asked an individual I used to work with quite often if he could do something for me and try to obtain Raymond Van Evenhoven's DNA.
The current chief deputy of Oconto County and Detective Baldwin developed a plan to conduct a survey with Ray, because Ray kind of lived in the middle of nowhere, and it was hard to actually do surveillance and follow him around and try to get a discarded cigarette butt or something like that.
They knocked on his door and said, hey, we're doing a survey of what you think of policing in this particular township. Gave him the survey. Raymond filled out the survey, put it in the envelope, and licked the envelope to seal it.
Raymond's saliva sample is compared to the DNA left at the crime scene over 40 years ago. It is a match.
We were very excited because we finally had narrowed down on a suspect, and now it was just a matter of putting the rest of the pieces of the puzzle together as best as we could. We developed a plan to go arrest Ray and conduct a search warrant of his residence at the same time, and we went there, and Detective Baldwin and I went in first while the rest of the crew staged to conduct the search warrant. And we met Ray at his house. He invited us inside. We explained, hey, we're from the Marinette County Sheriff's Department and you're under arrest for homicide. Ray just kind of put his head down and turned kind of pale and just went along with us. He didn't argue, he didn't ask what this was about, nothing.
Throughout the investigation, we were under the impression that the suspect was going to be probably in his 60s or so. I never expected that I'd be handcuffing a 82-year-old man for first-degree homicide.
We were hoping we could find the murder weapon or some kind of evidence. Ultimately, we did find a .30 caliber 30-30 rifle in his garage.
They found some shell casings. They sent those off to the crime lab, but those were not a match for the bullet fragments that had been found at the crime scene. But again, this was 40-something years after the homicides. Very likely, he just disposed of any shell casings that was used.
He grew up in the rural Green Bay area, in the Suamico area. He worked as a metal worker his entire life, and we were told from talking to people that he was either working or he was drinking and drunk and angry.
Raymond was 20 years old in 1950 when he was arrested for attacking a couple of teenage girls, a 17-year-old and a 16-year-old. The 17-year-old was walking with friends when he grabbed her and pulled her into a cemetery. She was screaming and her friends came to her aid. He was already married, but he attacked these two young women. He spent 6 months in prison, and that seemed to be that, although nowadays we would put him on a sex offender registry, which would flag him in a way that didn't happen back in the 1950s and 60s.
Raymond is brought in for questioning over the murders of David Schuldes and Ellen Matthees back in 1976.
And then when Detective Baldwin kind of brought out the pictures of the victims, Ray got kind of angry and really defensive. He didn't show any signs of sympathy for the victims or any remorse for what he'd done.
And claimed to have absolutely no knowledge of the crimes of David and Ellen.
Why did you kill these two people?
Why did you do that?
Well, you killed them, right?
You killed them. You meant
I did. I don't even know.
You might not know them, but you killed them.
Well, I didn't.
Does it ever wake you up at night? Ray, does it ever wake you up at night? This doesn't ever cross your mind, ever? Nope, never? So what you did there doesn't even matter. Don't even care. Remember the blood flying out of her when you shot her, Ray. And then shooting her a second time.
You shot any goddamn body.
You shot him. You shot him. You shot him. You shot him. You did. I did. Yeah, you did. I did not. You did.
No, I did not.
Well, then how did your semen get no shorts, Ray?
I don't know how to get there. What is that?
How would I get your semen?
Well, give me a shit. Go right there.
I'll tell you how you did. You sexually assaulted her.
No.
That's all got there.
No.
He was charged with 2 counts of what was then called first-degree murder in the Wisconsin statute. The sexual assault charge we could not go forward with because at that time there was only a 6-year statute of limitations, and that had expired.
Now charged for the murders, Raymond Van Evenhoven is put in custody while awaiting trial.
We were concerned that he was going to have some kind of medical event or medical condition, which was going to, take him away from us before we had a chance to put him on trial. He had a stroke, and he ended up being sent to Mendota Mental Health in Madison to be evaluated. Initially, they thought he was probably not competent to stand trial or aid in his defense, and ultimately they decided he was competent.
The trial did not commence until, I believe it was July 19th of 2021. So yes, when you're dealing with someone in their 80s who did have some health issues, certainly that's a concern.
He was wheeled into court, but I thought his demeanor was just cold and didn't care what was going on around him.
Prosecutor Mark Williams gave the opening statement for the state and just basically outlined the evidence that we'd collected from the crime scene, and particularly the shorts, and how that was collected, how those were preserved, and then the DNA from those shorts from, 45 years earlier, and then ultimately a DNA profile was taken from that. He then talked about the different investigative techniques that the Marinette County Sheriff's Office had used and how we ultimately came to the Van Evenhoven family and to Raymond Van Evenhoven himself, and how the evidence is going to show the inarguable link between Mr. Van Evenhoven and the DNA in Ellen Matthews, and how we were going to put that together and show that only Raymond Van Evenhoven could have killed Ellen and David.
Despite the evidence stacked against him, Raymond's defense tries to maintain his innocence.
They tried to separate the sex and the semen from the homicide, to try to say that there wasn't a link between the two. And then they tried to argue that this male that had been seen by our two witnesses when they were driving on Parkway Road, they tried to argue that that was some different. Somehow, Raymond had sex with Ellen the day or two before she goes up with her fiance on a camping trip, and then some other random male kills them. The jury didn't buy that argument.
The jury deliberates for just 2 hours before reaching a verdict. August the 26th, 2021, 84-year-old Raymond Van Evenhoven is sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences.
You find out who it was, they're convicted, they're sentenced to prison, and Ray died within a few months of going to prison.
We knew his age, we knew his health, so I didn't expect him to live very long, but kind of wish that he could have hung on as long as he possibly could have, so he could at least suffer in prison for the next few years anyways.
The only thing I can say about somebody like that is he had to be a psychopath. He knew what he was doing when he was going through the woods carrying a rifle. David and Ellen just happened to be in the wrong spot. He saw them there and took his weapon and killed them both, knowing full well what he was planning to do and carrying it out in the manner that he did.
This case is a really good illustration of how powerful investigative genetic genealogy is for revealing secrets of all kinds. Your DNA can absolutely tell the story, no matter how old a case is, no matter when or where it happened.
This young couple now would be grandparents themselves. They would be close to celebrating their golden wedding anniversary. And thanks to this technology and thanks to the preservation of evidence, they now lie in their graves side by side with this crime solved.
These young people were killed 24, 25 years old, never had a chance to live their lives.
A tragedy. He went on with his life for that long, and Ellen and David were taken as mid-20s, a vibrant young couple. Didn't seem fair, didn't seem right. But in the end, justice was done, and we're proud of that.